When people think of self improvement, generally they think of it as something positive, given how life, in its essence, is something that requires consistent change for you, given now it's something that consistently changes, as in the experience of someone's experience of their own life is one of consistent change. It's never stagnant where life today is life tomorrow. It's never like that. It's always changing. And where generally people would want to have, or from the way I see it, people would want to have, they want to see their life improving or getting better more than it getting degraded, which is where now self improvement is seen as something that we should lean towards. And I suppose then, if self improvement is the thing you should lean towards, having a system where self improvement is the thing you're focusing on or where you're improving regularly would seem like a good thing to have. I mean, logically, if you think about it, if you can improve yourself on a much faster pace, then you would have the skills to improve your life much better if you think about it. But for me, it hasn't really been the case, more so because of how obsessed I've become with it and its effect on my life over the past 6 years. But before I dive into that, let me just say that this is a new segment called Subbox Radio. It isn't technically a radio channel, and I was planning on releasing lives, but well, one, for consistency issues, and I mean, I am a student, so here and there I might not be consistent on a specific day. So that's the first one. But now doing this as well, like actually practically doing it, I've seen that I'm gonna need a lot of practice. It's not as easy as it looks, I suppose. But it's still gonna be Subway's Radio. I like the idea of it, and yeah. So what is it gonna be about? Basically, I'll be breaking down the world or the structures of the world, personally, the structures of our own personalities, the structures of society, in a philosophical and a psychological manner, and basically what it's gonna be about. So let's get back to creating a system for self-improvement. Now, like I said, I've been into the self-improvement world for 6 years, roughly, which means that I started in 2018. Now in 2018, where was I? Well, I was in grade 8. And in grade 8 was one of the first times where school became boring to me. I was someone who was, I suppose I'm also someone, well, I'm an insanely curious person, that's number one. But number two, I also like challenges. And whenever I challenge things, I think on a call once I was with a friend, and then I brought up that I just want to do a challenge just for fun, because that's just me. And then it's like, some things change. People do this for like a real job, but for me, I want to do it for fun. Let me just check if this thing is recording quickly, and then I'll be back. Okay, looks like it is. So he said that people do this for a job, like an actual job, but I just want to do it for fun. Well, that's just me. I like doing things for fun. I like the challenge of it. I find that the place where you achieve the most fun, and I suppose the most fun and freedom, are the things that I suppose I push towards. So the place I achieve the most fun or the most joy and happiness is where accomplishing that thing or that difficult thing, which is where the challenge comes in, and then achieving that's where you get the intensity of the emotion of that you get up there is just unparalleled compared to anything else. So that's where the challenge comes in. Now, given that school in essence became boring, and well, I was quite on the other side. I was slowly getting to business content, seeing what business is about, I started with shares first of all, and then seeing what business is about and getting into that world. And then by getting into that world, then I got into a business. And well, the first book I read was this one here called Before You Quit Your Job by Robert Kiyosaki, one of the few philosophy books that were in the house back then. Now, well, I've bought quite a catalog of them. So it's quite weird seeing how it's quite nostalgic remembering that this is one of the only business books back then that we had here. Most of them in the house are probably economics based, but in the academic sense, and not really in the suppose business context of the way. Well, there's academic economics, and then there's like a content made by business owners and whatnot. But anyway, I digress. That's not really the main point here. But that's one of the main books that I got into, and one of the interesting quotes back then, as because while I was reading this book, I was also getting to YouTube channels, Instagram channels, seeing Instagram accounts back then, I suppose, and seeing what they were like. And then I suppose an interesting quote from Robert Kiyosaki, the author of this book, was A plus students will work for C plus students. And well, what does that really mean? I was the A plus students, intelligent, someone people would consider smart back then in my age group, given that I was getting, I suppose, good marks. And for me, I didn't want to be the A plus student working for the C plus students. Just didn't make sense. And I wanted to figure out, why is that the case where success wasn't tied to money? I suppose back then, in grade 8, relatively young, back then I wanted material success, and I think many people wanted it, and I wanted to figure out, I think another one is that while they were proving the point in YouTube videos and all of that, was that people, well, this is just, I suppose, paraphrasing, that people dumber than you, well, this could be the real quote, but anyway, people dumber than you will actually tend to make more money than you. And I suppose if I scale it back philosophy wise, right, I don't see school as being the thing for smart anymore, but again, that's beside the point. Now, that was really the main thing, was that the main point here is that school wasn't tied to success or what success was, which was, well, interesting. Why is that? And I really wanted to figure out how then do I actually become someone who gets the success, and because I really, control is something I enjoy over my own life, and something that I want and, well, work towards. So I wanted to figure that out, and that's how I got into business book, and then, well, business content. And then the funny thing about business content is that it tends to be about self-improvement. So that's, well, how I got into self-improvement, and I suppose also human behavior, because as a business owner, founder, entrepreneur, you're dealing with people in general. And that's how I got into How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the first few books I bought, which is, I think it's the first book. That's the first book I actually bought, which, once again, it is quite nostalgic, because with this one here, it wasn't the first book, but it wasn't mine, right? This was actually one of the first book that I bought from a very young age, and I read. And its effect, well, this set the tone for a very detrimental few years, I suppose. The one, I suppose, Think and Grow Rich, as well as The Master Key to Riches, which, well, technically speaking, I didn't really understand, because if you read these books, they're quite philosophical, and now, I mean, if you read, it says Think and Grow Rich and The Master Key to Riches, but if you actually read them, they're really highly philosophical. So it didn't really give you the actual steps and points, but that, I suppose, ties back to why then business content tends to be about self-improvement rather than money-wise, because it's not really about the type of money you make, it's about the way you think and the way you see the opportunities and all of that. But okay, so how does that tie into self-improvement and where I've been? For me, grade 8, towards the late end of grade 8, around term 3 here in South Africa is about September, October onwards. So that's how I got into it. Then grade 9, 10, so on. That kind of followed. That's how I got into self-improvement. So I got somewhat lost in the world. That's really what happened. Think about how someone gets lost in a career, or someone gets lost in their job, or figuring out, sorry about that. say someone, think about the way someone gets lost in a career or gets lost in a job. That became me, but for self improvement. And well, that is why. So you might say, ask me, why is that a bad idea? Think about the time. Why is that a bad thing? I think that's a better way to put it. Think about the time when I went into it, right? I am 13, roughly. 13, 14. And I technically don't have a personality formed by that time. So, with no personality formed, and with so many different ways that you could improve yourself, or so many different characteristics of yourself that you could improve, that's how there wasn't really a, because self improvement became my main thing or thing that I was pushing. I've never, the mental aspect was what I was developing more so than the actual real me core self that has been, that kind of guides and decides for what you should, all of that. The real me wasn't developed. It was more so the characteristics of my personality that got developed. And over time, as that has went, it's only now, I suppose, that I'm actually getting back to being, I suppose, me. But it's now I'm seeing that the curiosity and the ambition and the thing coming back to haunt me as why I started this journey back then. But here's how I survived, I suppose, for 6 years with no core personality. Say you read a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think, or go into Stoicism, which was a thing I went into a few times. So how to win friends and influence people. Basically, it's a book about. I mean, sure, you might find it manipulative or persuasive, but really, it's a book about. Well, I suppose it is. It's not really a philosophy. It's not really a psychology book where you're manipulating human psychology. It's not really like that. It's how small gestures and small, I suppose, it's how we as people generally underestimate the effect of the positive things and outcomes that we could have on people. So, how doing small things here and there could actually change your outcome. Because, I mean, if you think about it for yourself, would you rather have, as people, we would rather have control or superiority, or feel like we have superiority over ourselves and other people. So, using that to your advantage then allows you to get, in a sense, more from the person, not to get what you want, but also benefiting them. So, I mean, it's a topic for another day, but that's that's the book as it is. So I'd highly recommend it. There are some things you would. It is a good book, but for me at that time, it wasn't really the best because of how I am mentally, because of how I am personally. So how did I take? Let's start by the different phases that I went through. Well, I started. Yeah, I think it's best to start at the different phases that I went through. So, grade 8, grade 9, I was learning how this thing works, what this business world is about. And then I stumbled across that you have to learn how human psychology and how human psychology works in general. How does it work? How does it influence you? Because when it comes to a company running a business, that that has an impact on your sales. That has an impact on the partnerships that you make with people who to get into business with, who to not get into business with, how to develop leaders to see who's a leader, how to delegate, all of that. So around grade 10 was when I set up to figure out how do you actually, around grade 10 was when how do you actually understand people. I set out to figure out human psychology. How to read people. That's what I set out to do. And which, again, is not a bad thing, but you'd much rather have a base personality to base off of than this set of rules that you get by learning how to read people. So you learn how to read people. For now, I've sort of someone developed a pattern to read people, or like a flow. Well, I started off with the flow. Now I can just feel with the energy and so on. That's how I generally read people right now. But it starts off with there's a sort of rules and patterns and things that you realize about people and the way they work, and it's somewhat intuitive now for me. But there's that there's that set of rules in that world that you learn, but there's no set of rules with you internally. So you take when you yourself are searching for a way to live, the way of observing other people becomes your way to live, right? So then that's the first that's the first, I suppose, way that is fought. And then whenever, I suppose, well, right now I'm kind of blank, which doesn't really make for a good, suppose, explanation. But another thing I had was I would be able to somewhat cut off characteristics and personalities. So whenever I'd want to, okay, so let's say I developed the skill to understand how human behavior. That's what I was able to and predict, I suppose. Understand and predict human behavior and how it worked. So I started off there. Now, moving on, then I want to develop my communication. Now, seeing that the things that are hindering me from communication then are my observation skills, analytic skills. So what I would do then is that somewhat cut my personality off and then create a new one. So now I'd have this subset of personality that I wouldn't focus on, I'd keep to the side. And then I'd focus on the goal of creating or making myself a better communicator. And that'd be the goal I'd be pursuing or pushing for. I'd have that for some time until I was good at it. And then later on, I'd integrate the two, because then it generally flowed in the cycle of there's a goal I want to pursue. My current personality can't meet that. So when I break this off so that there's no interference between the two personalities, and then I use this personality to then work towards figuring out how to make myself this type of person, the type of person who can communicate, who can communicate, have the right sales, what type of mindset that is required. Then I get to the goal from myself, and then I feel personality wise I'm not there. I'm not finding the groove or the jam. And that's when then I'd integrate these two personalities, the personality that I had before, of finding my quote unquote base, even though I haven't. But finding that base that I had before of the two personalities of how I actually was, and then combining that with this new personality that I have now, and combining the two, which is why back then when I was trying to figure out how do personalities work and all of that, I didn't like to call it personality because I found it malleable around grade 10, grade 11, when in the sense of teenagehood where it's all chaos and all of that. I didn't like to call personality because I found it didn't really truly capture it. Because suppose generally another thing I found was that with people at that age, it's more you're somewhat faking a personality. It's not really your true core you, where the mask you would put up wouldn't be the true you, which well makes sense. I mean, you're at the time of your life where you're trying to figure out where you're going with the world. Okay, maybe you're not there. That happens. Well, that happened for me once matric hit or after matric. But you're still trying. You're trying to figure out what type of personality you want to have, and you also don't want to seem too vulnerable. And a lot of, suppose, juggling the dynamics of being in a place where you're with other people dealing with that. So it makes sense why you'd have masks, but that was something I found then. I didn't want to have a mask. I wanted to be, from a young age, to have my own unique way of seeing the world and diving deeper and deeper into why things are. Why is this like that? Why is that like that? Which is why I was saying that for me, I didn't consider myself smart because I was good in school, but rather I consider myself smart because of the way I saw the world and all of that. Why I bring that up is because being smart, well, for me, doing well in school wasn't really a matter of being smart. I thought smart was something else. Now, that becomes important because, say, smart people are somewhat idolized in school because they're the ones who are people think are the ones who are gonna get the most success in life because they're the ones who are achieving that high status. But for me, it really wasn't that hard to get good marks. So that's what made it easy then to transition from that mind state to being to one where I view the world from a business perspective. Because then I didn't have that fight where people were the ones that will be successful. And also for me, I just saw school as my system for school was pretty easy. And even now to this day in varsity, it's I know what to do when I need to do it to get the results that I need to get. So that is why I didn't get sucked up into school. That's what made it easier for me to transition from a point where I was understanding, a point where school was the thing I made success, to a point where now I was able to see the business world and all of that. So, okay, so back to personality and how personality, the ways I was developing my personalities and the ways I was learning, and that's pretty much how it's been. One example is that I wanted to understand human behavior, and then second thing is communication, understanding the business world, and then I think around then, ever since then, I've had a fight with my personality. There was another thing I've dived really heavily. That's when also I dived really heavily into. So I think the two main so the steps then would be, first thing would be reading, I suppose, these two books, and then getting into these two books, which, well, I understood but I didn't really understand. Now that I think about it, most things were flying over my head, but that's how I got into it. I was still interested in it. That's how I started in philosophy. So from then, around grade 10, that's when I then went into understanding what is human behavior, trying to figure out the pattern. And I think one thing that has helped me, because when it comes to adulthood, right, or that is that's more, to understand where that comes from, it's best to look at the childhood. So now that, because then most of the system that you use to understand the system that you use as an adult tends to stem from the system you use as a child, and most of the emotions as a child that you showed get, I suppose, layered as you grow older and older, which makes it much harder to understand. So as an older person, if you're starting out, it becomes much harder to understand human behavior as an older person, because then you're not really, because then people are layered and they won't actually let you dive deep into the personality and all of that. Whereas as a teenager, it's so much easier, because then by understanding that, you understand somewhat base personality, and that's when that is, I suppose, that made it much easier to understand human behavior, human personality, because there wasn't that many people were also developing them and seeing and testing out. So you're seeing, if you get through the initial mask, you're able to see the base personality. So that's what made it easier to understand human, and then you just see that it becomes just a bit more layered. But since I could see the base personalities as they were and understand them from then, it's not that difficult to figure out and connect things. There's just maybe a bit more rules that you learn as I've gotten older, the way things change, but then that's more, the the base concept doesn't really change. So that's what, starting figuring out how people work from, that's how I started. And then I moved to understanding communication and sales and things, because I mean, there comes a time where if you've been in the world for, let's say, 3 years, economics, and it's really something that you're diving heavily into, you want to at least make some money out of it, or rather, you want to have the fruits of your labor show. So that's where the business side came of it. And I think even now, given how long I've been into it, it's still, I mean, I've been there for 6 years, and the fruits, I mean, there has to be a reason. The fruits have to show, I suppose. So just personally for me, that's just what it means. It just, the fruits have to show. So, but anyway, that's how I dived into then sales. What sales is, how to talk, the sales process, the sales structure, all of that, and then slowly I went into human psychology, I suppose. I went into philosophy much deeper then, because by then you're also trying to, well, I was trying to figure out what does it mean to be a man, how to be a proper man, how to be, and well, that how to be a proper man, I suppose. And then that's how I got into Stoicism, controlling your emotions. Controlling your emotions, controlling how you react and see, visualizing or seeing the world rationally, logically, thinking in proper steps, and all of that. Which is why right now it's the feeling that I wanted to transfer into this podcast was one where I'm able to somewhat, okay, that's why I'm able to now balance the two. I'm able to balance being hypercritical or being, yeah, hypercritical of myself while also seeing the gratitude nature of it. That really is because of Stoicism and thinking irrationally and seeing how things are just the way things are, and well, also control over emotions starting from, once again, a young age. I'm not just starting, it's now being developed and sort of made up. I've made it my own. So that's one of the reasons why it's I've made it my own. So because I'm not just starting in it, and that's how it's made its way into my own personality, which is why I'm then able to balance a hypercritical, being very hypercritical of myself. When if one small thing doesn't happen, then I just dive into it, and it's like, what did I do wrong? What can I improve on? What did I do wrong? What can I improve on? And it's like for every little situation that happens socially, that tends to be the case, which is why I don't like, which is why improvement in and of itself, that system of improvement has been so refined and tuned that it has become a source of, I want to say it's not really discomfort, but it has become a source where I tend to become, I suppose it's close to being, well, I don't want to say miserable, but that's really the only word I see now. It's close to having that feeling. Now, balancing that feeling as well with the feeling of still being able to get up and do what I need to do at a somewhat normal baseline. That's because of the control, and also being able to balance the many different perspectives. Because by developing many different personality characteristics, I'm also developing the many different personalities and viewpoints that combine together and all clash, which that was what I wanted to show, but there is a gap, I suppose, between what my mind thinks and the practical application of what I've actually done, what my mind has done. Which, well, that reminds me, I went into I'm not going to ramble on, so don't worry, but I had a fight with myself around, I suppose, 2021, grade 11, where I was fighting with doing versus thinking. Now, man, another thing I did was, I suppose, when I was thinking through things, right, the way I'd think through them was visualize the world as it is, visualize the situation, and maybe seeing what I could. Okay, I suppose first it started with seeing what I would do in that situation. That's how I developed my own personality characteristics, seeing what characteristics I want to develop. What would I do? And then, so what would I do as I am? Personally, why? Personally, what would I do in that situation? And then, what would I want to do? What would I want to be able to do? And then that'd be my metric for then pushing for that. But that's where it started. But then I also had a thing fighting between thinking and doing, when I think, well, I used to think quite a lot, was trying to figure out this whole system and measure. It might not show now since this is my first video, and well, things aren't coming out the way I thought they would, but seeing all these systems and structures, the way they are trying to figure out and wrap my head around them, and all of that. That that's why I did a lot of thinking, and then I suppose another thing I had to do was balance between the economics, the balance between going being an entrepreneur and the academic side. Since given that I'm in university now, I've obviously stayed in the academics space, so it's balancing the academics with the entrepreneurship because these two sides, if you actually look at the media, hate each other kind of. On the entrepreneurship side, you'll look at the entrepreneurship side, and the entrepreneurship side says, don't go to school, you don't need school, college is a scam, and all of that. And on the school side, school sides don't like what you need in business, which is then, on the school side, you become a specialist. And then, so sales, marketing, the easy jobs, well, the jobs that seem easy, where you're just talking to someone, or you're manipulating someone in sales and marketing, you're manipulating, using persuasion, all of that. That becomes then something that is, I suppose, hated, or from what I've seen back then when I was going to. Might have changed now, but that's the way I've seen it. We're gonna take a small break to recap and then to I suppose, coop, and then we'll get back. Okay, so now I'm back. Hopefully it will move faster. This video is already pretty long, so I suppose let's get towards the end. But I suppose we're pretty close to that as well. So I'm in 2021, 2022 developing my personality, but by that time, so I already developed a few characteristics, being the sales and the business, as well as also the trying to understand human behavior, which has been a skill that's been growing and evolving over time. Being now I see it as energies of trying to figure out. Now I just see it as being in tune with the energy of myself and the energy of other people, more so than actually thinking about it. Much of the things now I hardly ever think about is more just in tune and feeling. But anyway, I developed that at a young. So I developed that the understanding the human behavior, and then I developed I'm still in the process of developing business, and then by developing that I went to philosophy, and then I was starting to have a clash between the many different aspects of philosophy many different suppose philosophy advices and suggestions, how they were fighting and clashing in between each other, and that's where now I suppose that's when the problem started coming with this system of self-improvement in the way that I've taken it and making it my life's work, I suppose, even though, my life just relatively started. But anyway, that's really the main problem with making it my life's work, is that by the time when my personality was growing, I couldn't really grow it. My personality couldn't be developed as it is because I developed so many things on the surface and close to the surface with these many different characteristics that I had not developed the true self. So around that time was when I started to develop true self. But then when you try to develop, then you get hit by this barricade mentally of you have so many different things that you should and shouldn't do. As in Stoicism, why it really hasn't really. Okay, you have Stoicism, which means control your emotions, and control your emotions, think rationally, and all of that. So now, when you have a natural reaction to something or just a feeling that should be expressed, it wasn't really expressed because then these two things clash, and the mental aspect of it, where all these different personalities were developed to a much higher degree than this personality that was trying to grow, this my own personality, and those two. So when it comes to what would I do in a situation where I tend to pick the mental side over the self side because I know what this one would do, and it's been the one that I had been developing, which is then generally why I'd go somewhat I'd have a season when things are going well, and then have a crash, because then personality wants to be. The personality has the final say. The true core self has the final say. I think I should say that instead of personality. Now, the true core self has the final say. So I'd have crashes. I'd go up and then have a crash, go up and have a crash, go up and have a crash, go up and have a crash. And it's been that way for somewhat 3-4 years. And it's been the way ever since. So, and it'd be a deep crash where I wouldn't really be able to do, like, just mentally. I'd be redoing my personality in a sense. So I'd have a crash, right? Now, then I'd want to integrate my personality a bit more, because then seeing that the cause, because the core self, I'd want to integrate the core self a bit more. Seeing that core self has has the final say. You integrate the core self into this mental structure that I have. Go with that, have a crash, and then move like that, while trying to understand, while trying to combine and figure and make sense of all these many different, which advice should I take, which advice should I not, while also thinking about them and diving deeper into understanding them more and more and more. It's been a hectic journey, and it's been another thing that has made it, I suppose, worse was that I tend to want to, once I've had the self improvement system, it was more, how do I improve faster? How do I get better at improving? So, how do I make the rate of improvement improve? So it's been a tense system for me with how it's been, and suppose getting back to how self improvement is a lonely journey. By default, with my personality, being insanely curious, being intelligent, I tend to have a hard time, and also wanting a challenge. That's another thing. I tend to have not so supposed a hard time, because I can communicate with people, but I tend to have a hard time, say, getting sustainable friend groups. Oh well, yeah, I suppose getting sustainable friend groups, because then you have the general base form where by default I like a challenge, which, well, most people, I don't like change that much, and most people don't like change that much, and I also have the problem, and, well, I like to figure out the way the world works, which is, well, thinking, which is another thing people don't like doing, or, well, from what I've seen back in high school. So there's those two things, and then there's curiosity, where if I get something in, I'm just diving straight in, and that's pretty much all you're gonna hear about from me for a very long time. So, like, overwhelms people. So you have that, and then you have the fact that there's a high improvement rate, where as you improve, you tend to as you improve, then you're changing, I suppose. Now people don't like change as much, so then you start to develop the gap. They start becoming a gap that develops between you and your peers, which is then why I would say, and then slowly that gap becomes too large, where you might have to end. It's not the same as it was. The relationship that you had isn't the same as it was, which is then how we get to the fact that self improvement is a lonely journey, where from time to time, you do the ambition does fuel you for some time, but those moments where it's time to get the dip, those dips are here and there. You do feel that. Okay, I suppose for me, I do feel that loneliness coming back in, mainly because, once again, I'm still in the process of developing personality. So being able to stay alone, and in the process of just seeing that this is what I want to do, this is the way I want to see things work, and all of that. That process it's been developing as well. So that's it's not as lonely anymore, and I'm more able to understand and accept that this is the way that things are. From looking at things as the way they are, I'm able to understand that and see that things are the way they are, and it is what it is, and then being able to accept, and then being able to be okay with the way things are. So that's been something that's been developing, and suppose if you guys are still watching this long into the video, then self-improvement by default becomes a lonely journey, because by improving, then you're also improving yourself. Then improves I suppose the way you think, the way you think, the way you approach the world, and the way you view the world. So that then creates a clash between your previous you. Now the previous you was the one that dealt with your friends, with the peers or friends that you had, and then that now creates a conflict, I suppose. But that's it, I suppose, for saying that. That's it, I suppose, for. That's it, I suppose, for self-improvement being a lonely journey. This while rating it, standing here, being the one. I haven't seen the video or edit. I'm probably gonna be the one editing. Well, I am the one editing it. So, I mean, it's the first broadcast. So maybe we'll look back at this and say this is where all things started. Worst part is that I've been on YouTube for a year, but technically speaking, I've been behind the scenes writing a lot more than I have talking to the camera. But it's not that bad. I've had podcasts here and there, so this is something new. And well, I mean, my rating it's really bad, honestly speaking. I mean, hopefully you guys found some value. I suppose that's the main thing here. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.